All right, welcome everybody. Glad to have you here. This is another exciting episode of Techsplanation. Today, it's the security show. I mean, I thought I'd talk about like something really cheery being we're so close to Christmas and all. So I figured, well, why not talk about security? Because, and I don't know if you've watched the news lately, security's been kind of a thing. There's some stuff going on in the world. There's some hacks going on. There's some passwords getting shared. There's some really interesting things going on in the world around security right now. So the big question is, how does security fit into the Pro AV, broadcast, command and control space? I mean, security is really important in these spaces, so we're certainly going to talk about this today. And to talk about this, I've got a team because me talking about it by myself would be boring. So first off, I've got the ever venerable Mr. Jordan Friday in studio today, controlling the switch, the mix, the feed.
Thanks. Pushing the buttons.
All right. Thanks for being here, Jordan. Appreciate it. Glad to have you here. Now, okay, so the two of us together, we'd go nerd on like all things video, but we really need an expert to come in and talk about security. So with that in mind, I want to introduce Koutsaris from Matrox.
Hey guys. Hey Nick. Hey Jordan. Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. Thank you for being here and nerding out with us. Catherine, talk to people. Tell us what you do.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Koutsaris. I'm a product manager at Matrox Video for the KVM product line. So our flagship product is called XTO3. It's an IP KVM extender. I'm here at Matrox today, Matrox headquarters in Montreal, Canada. And yeah, super psyched to talk to you guys. Security is a hot topic, so definitely a lot to talk about.
Can't argue that. Okay, so I thought this was the perfect time to sort of pivot to, you know, the bigger conversation. Matrox is in general has a pretty broad portfolio, and what I wanted to focus on today was, you know, from a security standpoint, is really where that rubber meets the road with Matrox, and that's in the world of KVM. So Jordan, I think we have a slide for this.
We do indeed, my friend.
Yeah. So what is KVM? So Catherine, explain to the audience if they don't know, what is a KVM?
Yeah, sure. So KVM is an acronym. It stands for keyboard, video, mouse. And the whole purpose of a KVM extender is to extend these keyboard, video, or mouse signals over your network. So at Matrox, our product is called XTO3. We can extend up to a single 4K video or quad full HD signals. And of course, there's audio, USB, USB 2.0, keyboard, mouse, any other kind of USB HID device, and it could all be sent over your network. So in our case, we go over 1 gigabit network. We have very low bit rates. The performance is very seamless, feels like your computer is right next to you. But in reality, your computer could be, in the next room, in the next building, or even miles away. So that's the essence of what a KVM is meant to do. And we see it all over the world. People are using KVMs from something as simple as a one transmitter to one receiver point-to-point connection to managing and controlling networks of hundreds of computers at once. So it's a very interesting technology and scales really well depending on your product or your project, I should say.
So Jordan, we got a couple other slides on this. Let's go ahead and pop the... So it's the XTO3 IP KVM. And, you know, and I thought what's interesting is that you're 4K across a 1 gig network. So it is very well-packed video. I mean, how many channels of video are we pushing down that 1 gig?
Well, for one unit, it would be a single 4K channel, or you can do 4 times full HD. So 4
1080p's in there. Got it.
Exactly, yeah.
Nice. And plus the keyboard, the mouse, and obviously no CEC controls. So we're holding off on that.
Definitely not.
But jump forward a little bit. So here's a nice sort of a diagram, sort of, and again, this kind of goes back to what you were talking about there. We've got, the private WAN, or that might be down the hall or down the street. And then the local LAN where we've got, XTO receivers connected to that LAN, kind of tying everything together. And so conceptually, from like a post-production standpoint, where we're seeing, like, rather than having the big noisy computer in your room, right, in your editorial space, we can put that big noisy computer down the hall, down the street, in the the server room, directly connected to storage, directly connected to our high-speed infrastructure, and only be driving it remotely from that control room, which changes the sound in that small room. It changes the heat in that room because we don't have the big engine spinning away. Remember those old Mac trash cans? How much heat, those things kick off. So, definitely changes sort of how you would design. And this falls into command and control as well when we're building up a large video wall and we're going to be bringing signals from a bunch of computers. We've got a little layer of security there. And security is really where we're talking about today. So let me jump forward here because I think that's where we get into a couple. So talk to me about this slide here. So the layered approach to security that XDO3 brings.
Yeah, sure. So any KVM is going to bring you an additional layer of security, essentially because you're separating your source system or your PC away from the user. So you can have, hundreds of PCs in an underground bunker somewhere, and you can be confident enough that no one's going to jump in and, plug in a USB key containing a virus or sabotage your network. So that's one huge benefit of a KVM beyond just, let's say, having ergonomic workspaces and quiet, neat, nice aesthetic offices. Security is definitely a huge consideration. So what we talk about when we see our multi-level approach to security is really just the Matrox philosophy to security. So, we went through a few articles before where you could see that cybersecurity can't just be focus in one way. There's so many different ways that you could attack a network, and hackers are getting more and more sophisticated. So at least with our XTO3 product line, we're continuously doing vulnerability tests. We're always improving our feature set when it comes to security features, and we try to tackle it on different levels. So whether it's from the hardware level, for example, by blocking external USB or unrecognized USB devices from connecting, or whether it's different types of network options. How do you detect devices on your network, the handshakes that go on behind the scenes to make sure everything is secure, board authentication, user authentication. There's so many different levels. So at XTO3, for example, we have very sophisticated user authentication where it integrates with Active Directory. So any kind of user permissions that are already existing in your organization will just be naturally applied to your KVM matrix as well. So you can ensure that the people you want to be seeing things are seeing them, and the people you don't are not. And this is tied to a bunch of different topics, whether it's network segregation or air gapping or just different security levels. We see this a lot in our military and defense customers as well, where they really care about who's looking at what. And that type of granularity when it comes to setting up your KVM network is something that they really care about and look for and find in our products.
So you hit a couple threads there, and I want to jump back into those. But one was turning off USB. And I think it's interesting because if we go into the film world, there have been not hacks, but times when people, editors or people in connection to the media, have been able to remove films before they're done and publish them online ahead of release. So there have been a couple moments, and all those were always tied back to somebody having access to the content. Where that could have been solved with a KVM that had no USB connection, right? So no ability to tie an HID device, or not an HID device, a mass storage device, right? And then they couldn't have downloaded that file because they wouldn't have had access to it, sort of air gapping and firewalling, so to speak. So it's interesting that, that touches not just military, but even the film world as well, now that everything is being done in digital. Okay, so two other things you brought up, and the first one, we're going to jump to a slide on it, was air gapping. So you mentioned air gapping. Talk to me about what air gapping looks like. What is it? How is it achieved? Why should somebody do it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Air gapping is a really hot topic right now. Air gapping essentially is when you have your network and it's not connected to an open or public network such as the internet. So the internet is a huge vulnerability. For example, people can come in, like we saw, for example, with the article that you shared. Someone probably clicked on an email by mistake and it infiltrated their entire network. So the public internet adds a lot of uncertainty. So the purpose of an air-gapped network is when you have all of your devices that are, let's say, on a designated network, but that is separate from the open internet. So that's essentially the definition of air gapping.
So, Joe, we actually have a slide for this if you want to bring it up.
You got it, my friend.
All right, there it is. Oh, wait, there it is. There it is. Okay, so effectively we've got your IP KVM network living on one network, which is disconnected from the data, the machine network, so the computers we're controlling. So the only connection between the users is over that KVM, right? That's the only opportunity they have to control the computer, and those computers aren't on the network. Only, well, actually, in this point, there would be no, like internet net, but everything is sort of, there's a nice space between those, an air gap. Look, I got to use the air gap. There it is. But so that's just a nice way to build it. So you mentioned military. Who else is air gapping right now? Who do you see doing this?
Oh, yeah. Well, we see this in a bunch of different customers. The nuance where you would use KVM is when you're going between an air gap network or a non-air gap network. So, for example, the distinction that we see a lot with our customers is we have what they would call, let's say, the OT network, which is the operational technology network. So essentially anything that's going on in your building. So whether it's your lights, your elevators, your HVAC system, whatever, all the way up to, let's say, the machines that you're using in your manufacturing line, or your anything that you're manipulating, whether it's in a plant or in a control room or something like that. And that's what we consider the OT network, which is separate from your IT network, which is your infrastructure technology network, which would be anything data related. So your emails, your Microsoft Teams, your files, your Word documents, whatever, that's IT. So on the IT network, you typically want that to be connected to the internet because that's how we receive emails or browse the web. That's how we do a lot of our tasks. But what you don't want is a connection between the internet-enabled network, so the IT network, and the OT network. And a lot of times what our customers want to do is air gap the OT network so that that's secure. So if someone comes in, knock on wood, and hacks your emails and the data network, your operations network will not be affected. So the example I said before about a nuclear power plant, for example, it's one thing to breach some emails, but imagine someone gets in and is able to control your nuclear reactors. You can imagine how this would be devastating. So when it comes to air gapping, you'd want that network to be air gapped, not necessarily the IT network. Now, the slide that you showed before about how the KVM network fits all into this is imagine above these two networks, you have the KVM network. And then the KVM network allows you to switch very seamlessly between the two. So someone could be controlling, a machine or something in their manufacturing plant, and then quickly switch and check an email or Google something, and then move back and forth. And the KVM adds that extra layer of protection in between where there's a full disconnect, reconnect. We clear the USB buffer in between, and you can maintain this. So we see this a lot, for example, in process control, oil and gas, energy sectors, things like that. We also see it a lot in military and defense, because in those types of networks, you have different security levels. So you'll have, let's say, the top secret level clearance and then secret level clearance. You don't want your top secret clearance information to trickle into your secret clearance information, but you have maybe a user who's going to want to access both networks. So how do you do that? A KVM is a perfect opportunity to do this because you can jump back and forth, but then still maintain the integrity of the security features,
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because a lot of times I'll see customers who are just like, why, when I can just remote desktop in? Right? I can just jump onto any server on my network and remote desktop and be controlling it, but that requires everybody to be on the same network, which then gives that capability of being breached or sharing malware, ransomware, that type of thing. So it's that space in between that allows us to have control, but cuts off the ability to share malfeasances. Okay, so I think it's a good pivot because air gapping and network segmentation are hand in hand, but slightly different things. So talk to me a little bit about network segmentation.
Yeah, so with the example I gave before about having your OT network separate from your IT network is a perfect example of network segmentation. So essentially you're making little segments in your network, and what that'll do is if there ever is an attack, it won't propagate to the entire network. It'll just be constrained to that one part. So Jordan, which is great.
Put together a little bit of an animation here to kind of talk about that. So here's our network. Here's all our people on the network. And okay, somebody gets hacked. Ordinarily, if they're all on the same network, well, then we're spreading that virus, kind of like COVID, around the room. It's the COVID of computers. I like this. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm going to get messages on that one. I'm serious. Like, here come the emails already. By the way, anybody, if you're out there in the audience and you have questions, feel free to type them in, ask them. Catherine's happy to answer everything. I'm just going to stand and watch or sit and watch. All right, so we've got this network segmentation now where we have a virus that gets hit, somebody clicks on the wrong TikTok video. However, because we have them firewalled, air gap, locked away, everybody's on their own. Well, then now we've got the ability to protect, right, or to block that virus from spreading across the network. I accidentally slid the next slide in, but now everybody knows what we're going to talk about next. So, but that's good. That's good. All right. So this is all fine and well. I mean, security is very important. Everybody needs to be thinking about it. And I think the big thing here is oftentimes we don't think about it in the pro AV market as much as we probably should. Right? We're not thinking about how to build security into our conference room designs, into our post-production designs. And it's probably something that really needs to be a big part of the conversation moving forward. And where Matrox sits within that space to build that is important. Now, you've brought up some military applications. And obviously, if we were telling the salespeople like, hey, where to go hunt, we would say, military, government, these are all important spaces. But there's a major certification that falls into these spaces. And I want you to talk about it. I snuck it in here already. But TAA compliance. So let's talk about TAA compliance for a minute. What is it? How do you get compliant? And why does it matter?
Yeah, it's a great question. It comes up all the time. We get the request, do you have TA compliant SKUs? A lot of times it's a checklist item. Are you TA compliant? If you're not, okay, not even worth continuing the conversation, One thing though, I do have to kind of correct you a tiny little bit is that their TAA certification is not a thing. There isn't a governing body that gives out TAA certification.
But everybody slaps the label on all their websites. We're TAA. So who defines it? What is the roadmap to saying, all right, I'm compliant?
So you could be TA compliant, but it isn't an official certification that you apply for, and then there's an external body that validates it and gives it to you. So TA compliant essentially means that everything that you're doing is manufactured in the United States, manufactured or substantially transformed, which is also a little bit open to interpretation. In the US or in another TAA compliant country. So usually these are internal processes that organizations go through to look at all of their manufacturers, put it all together, and then they can proudly say that they are TAA compliant. So a lot of times, it's kind of like I mentioned, a checklist item, when it comes to getting spec'd into projects for the military, for example.
Yeah, no, for the military, and they want to understand where was it built. And some of this goes into slave labor effectively, right? Was this built in a country where, or predominantly in a country where fair labor, fair wages were happening? And then what is the security around all the components and where they came from, right? Was this, is there the possibility of malware being injected into some of the components? And so it's about who's got control of all those pieces and where are they putting them together, so that we know that the piece we're putting in isn't, and this is very different from FAR compliancy, which we had that sitting up here. That's NDAA. That's really designating who manufactured the chip that is being used. And these two kind of collide sometimes, I notice that, because you're TAA doesn't mean you're FAR compliant, because you're FAR compliant doesn't mean you're TAA. And we're starting to see more and more places request both. Not only where was it finally produced, but what are the components in the production. Now, for Matrox, you're building in a way that you can be TAA compliant. Is that all being done up in Canada?
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned a lot of really interesting topics just now. When you talk about, general skepticism towards offshore technology, that's definitely true, whether it's because of labor rights or just because of the unknown of what exactly is being put in. Like you mentioned TikTok a few times now in this podcast. I mean, did you know, for example, like it's you're not allowed in many states to download TikTok on government devices, and I believe that it was just introduced with a new bill like today or yesterday or something, that they were going to make that a federal mandate.
You see how I snuck that in there, right? Yes, we're talking about security, and partially because the concept behind this app is that a lot of data is flowing outside of the U.S. and they can't understand where and why, right? It's very similar to some of the bans we're seeing with like Huawei and ZTE and some of these manufacturers where they've lost control of, well, what is this component doing, right? And so this is where TAA and FAR come in to say, look, if you can meet these specifications, not certifications, I'm learning, then we have a higher level of security that, and control on this. And we've seen some customers even recently in the US are saying, okay, we only want to buy FAR compliant products, right? We only want to make sure that the products we're putting in are meeting this specification.
So TA applies to software as well. If your software is made in a non-TA compliant country, then you're not TA certified. So it's not just hardware; it's also software regulation, or not regulation. Let's say compliance specification as well. At Matrox, I mean, we've been in the business for 45 years, and we're founded in Canada, or in Montreal specifically. We have our own manufacturing plant here, so all of our technology is designed in Montreal. All of our core technology comes from here, and we build a lot of our equipment here in house. So TAA was really nothing new for Matrox. It's kind of who we've always been. We take security very seriously, of course. So now this is just a natural extension. And to hear that there's a TAA compliance logo to finally validate what we've been doing the whole time has been really great. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been popular. We see a lot of the camera manufacturers are starting to glom onto that, especially the ones that are being built in Taiwan and in Japan and other places. They're really saying, okay, cool, we got to, get that logo up on our site. Not just the Teams certification, the Zoom certification, but now the TAA. Okay, so you mentioned Matrox. So, let's talk about the bigger portfolio. One, how long has Matrox even been around? I mean, it's a name that I've known forever. From my computer nerd days, because there were Matrox, GPUs, and there's been Matrox products out there forever. Give me a little history on the company.
Yeah, sure. So we celebrated our 45th anniversary last year, I believe. So it's definitely been around a while. It's kind of a staple here in Montreal in the tech scene. It happens very often. Someone finds out I work at Matrox and they have a story about, oh yeah, my first graphics card or whatever was Matrox, and they love to reminisce and ask if we still do graphics cards, things like that. So, we've come a long way. We have, like you showed on the screen before, kind of a diverse set of products right now.
Jordan, bring that back up for a minute so we can talk about this. So from a larger landscape, obviously the KVM, the AV over IP infrastructure, and I think this is a really interesting one because you blend sort of traditional AV over IP and broadcast AV over IP. So you kind of live on both sides. Video walls, live streaming, recording. I mean, it's a very diverse portfolio for a company that is, it ought to be at 45 years, in the industry.
Yep, a lot of our products work together. They allow you to build kind of a nice ecosystem of not just the fact that they work together and they're easy to set up together and things like that, but you get the trusted Matrox name across your entire ecosystem, which is nice. So like you saw before, we have the encoders, the decoders, video wall products, and that's just to name a few. So there's a lot of cool technology coming out of Matrox right now, and as technology evolves and security standards evolve as well, we're always adapting, always growing. You can't stay asleep when you're in tech.
That is true. That is true indeed. I want to say a big thanks to Catherine for joining the show today and putting up with our nerdery.
I love it. This is the type of chaos I think that I need in my life. It's great.
Nice.
Wow, then you gotta hang out with us more often.
JB&A crew.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
I wasted no time in getting back to the JB&A logo. Thank you for mentioning both company names because we couldn't make it more confusing by having two names. That's good. No, it was fun having you. I'm really excited. You're right. We need to do this again in a couple months and talk about where the industry continues to evolve to, and how security is evolving. So, as always, if people have questions and want to know more about air gapping, security with Matrox, how do they reach out to you?
Oh, they could just visit us on our website. We have tons of resources there. They could also book a demo, request to speak to a salesperson or a product manager like myself. We're always ready and very willing to answer your questions. It's a complicated topic. None of this is general knowledge, so we're always ears open, ready.
Agreed. It is not general knowledge, but it's one that I think that everybody needs to really grasp onto, because security needs to be on top of everybody's mind when they're designing systems. Absolutely. All right, with that being said, we're going to call this episode of Techsplanation over and out. Catherine, again, thanks for being here. Appreciated having you.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure catching up with you guys.
Awesome. All right, I want to thank everybody for joining the show today. If you have more questions, type them in. If you want more information, wing us an email or just let us know in the chat box. And we'll see everybody on the next episode of Techsplanation. Thanks all.